Right, guys, going to possibly do the quickest video I've ever done in my entire life. It's the 20th of May, and a few of you who have requested a Regenerating Places video in time for tomorrow morning, ready for your exam in the afternoon of the 21st of May. So I'm going to do my absolutely very best. I think I'm probably going to get through EQ1 and EQ2, and that's all I'm probably going to get time to do. If I can do any more, I will, but time is very much against us. Before we get cracking, just take a note to check my bio. I've put a link in there for the upcoming paper 3 paper. This is classically the one that people struggle with the most, simply because it's a lot of colleges and high schools don't have time to teach it very well. If you're in that boat and you're really struggling with the paper 3 style, like you don't know your analyze questions, you don't know what AO3 is, you don't know how to evaluate in paper 3, this course is the one for you. It's going to be an 8-day intensive course, 4 over the half term, 4 when we get back after half term, and it will get you as ready as you possibly can be for that paper that is, at the end of the day, worth 20% of your overall grade. Right, off we go with Regenerating Places EQ1. Okay, so remember with EQ1, we are breaking down those economic sectors into 4. We've got the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary economic sectors. What you've got to be able to do is link the balance of those sectors to different social outcomes, because ultimately all of those sectors and the percentages of people that are employed in those sectors can have a knock-on effect to income, and that can have a knock-on effect to all of your social outcomes like physical health, mental health, and educational attainment. Observe. Let's say, for example, you're on low income. That might mean that you have less choice over where you live. You live in a food desert, you are going to lack access to fresh produce. There's probably going to be an abundance of processed foods, high in salt, sugar, and fat. That can lead to things like cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes type 2. All of these things can reduce your life expectancy, income, social outcome. What about mental health? Low income, financial stress, increased feelings of anxiety, depression, probably more likely to engage in self-medicating behaviors such as drugs, alcohol. This further compounds the issues. The likelihood of you gaining meaningful employment lowers and your self-esteem lowers. Poor mental health. Then we've got income and educational attainment. Income, less choice over where you live, probably going to live in private accommodation, which you have little control over the standards of that accommodation. Might contain high volumes of mold, damp. That's going to lead to respiratory conditions in the younger members of the household. Attendance is going to drop, attainment's going to drop, and you're probably likely to get less educational attainment. Now remember, all of those things will reinforce the other. They all mesh, they all merge together, and suddenly you find yourself in the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So that is fundamentally related to the economic sector balance in your place. Now we've got historic reasons for why that is the case, because remember, the North concentrated on industry, whereas the South tended to diversify a little bit more, and it's more diversified towards the tertiary and quaternary sectors. Then when the spiral of decline hit with deindustrialization, that left the North in a very precarious situation. So it tends to be the case that average incomes in the North are lower than your average incomes in the South, and therefore, because of everything we've just spoken about, lower income, probably going to have poorer social outcomes. So what does this look like in 2026? So we've got the booming M4 corridor down south, which is all about permanent, high salary, quaternary sector jobs. But in the former industrial heartland, if you like, we're seeing a sudden surge in what we would call like the gig economy. And it's an explosion in temporary, part-time, seasonal, 0 hours contract style work. So remember, it's not just about the sector, it's about the type of employment as well. Ideally, you want full-time, high paid, nice and secure, banks more likely to give you a mortgage rather than these 0 hours contracts where you get no sick pay, they're temporary, they're probably low paid anyway. Ideally, you want to be in that camp there. So February 2026, the UK service sector grew by 1.1%, while manufacturing lagged by 0.3%. We're not likely to see that growth in the manufacturing sector. So ultimately, we get a geographical map of winners and losers. So if your town or city is stuck in low-end tertiary work, the regeneration starting line is miles behind the rest. So this is where we can start to think about the north-south divide. So this economic variation bleeds into the social factors as we've already discussed, specifically health and life expectancy. So let's look at 2026 in the numbers. In the most deprived areas of England, mostly concentrated in the north, male life expectancy has dropped to 73.2 years. Compare that to the leafy southeast, where it's hit 83.6 years. We've also got to look at what's called healthy life expectancy. So this is really one for your 20 markers when you're bringing in that additional bit of knowledge. In the north, people are expected to spend around 49 years in healthy life expectancy, whereas in the south, that number jumps to nearly 70. This isn't just bad luck, this is productivity loss. So as of March 2026, poor health in the north is costing the UK economy $18.4 billion a year in lost productivity. People in the north are twice as likely to lose their job due to ill health compared to those in the south. So you can't regenerate a place if the workforce is too sick to work. Also in 2026, The gap in economic inactivity has also jumped. It's nearly quadrupled since the pandemic. Why is this? Because the South acts as that quaternary magnet. It's also called the overheated South, isn't it? So average weekly earnings in London remain 40% higher than those in the Northeast. But we've always got the evaluation point. So while the South does have money, it's also got a cost of living crisis. Londoners spend around 50% of their take-home pay on average on rent. So it creates a little bit of a paradox. The North has the space and the lower costs, but lacks the high-skilled job density. The South has the jobs, but is an overcrowded pressure cooker. So actually, it's not just a simple North-South divide anymore in 2026. While the North-South divide has actually increased since 2018, we're seeing a kind of patchwork economy. So some northern hubs like Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Newcastle are growing faster than some stagnant parts of the Southeast. So this success isn't coming from top-down strategies, it's coming from kind of health-centric productivity. So in your exam, don't just say the North is poor, because we aren't. Say that regional economic inactivity is driven by that feedback loop of low sector employment, leading to health, physical, health, mental, and lower educational attainment, which traps people in that intergenerational poverty cycle, and that this is more likely to happen in northern economies, but you do have our outliers, these reinventor cities. Okay? Onto functional and demographic change. So I'm going to take you through a few case studies now, which are all about this idea of function change. But what's function is the role that a place plays for its population. The bigger the place, the more varied the function. A place can have multiple functions. These can be like tourist, they can be retail, they can be commercial, industrial, administrative. They all mean different things. Residential. So we've got to be able to say as geographers, why has the function changed in certain places, and then what's the impact on the demographics, and then possibly the economy as well. So first we head to the extreme southwest in Cornwall. It was once the powerhouse of the British Empire, driven by the primary sector, specifically tin and copper mining. But when the deep pits closed, the function shifted rapidly to tertiary tourism, but it also became like a retirement powerhouse, if you like. To see the demographic impact, you need to have a look at the census data. So between 2011 and 2021, Cornwall's median age rose from 45 to 47, making it significantly older than the English average of around 40. So while the number of residents aged 35 to 49 fell by 8%, those aged 65 to 74 skyrocketed by nearly 26%. So in 2026, this creates a significant dependency ratio, and a growing one at that, where a shrinking working age population has to support a growing retired elite. And this is reflected in the IMD, where beautiful coastal villages mask hidden income and health deprivation, because the seasonal tourism economy just doesn't pay the bills. Next, we move to Leeds. Headingley is one of those where the place function can be, or could be considered to have been hijacked. Originally, this was a prestigious Victorian suburb, built for the middle-class elite to escape the smoggy, kind of polluted areas in the centre. However, as the nearby universities expanded, the function shifted from long-term family residential to a transient student hub. So let's get into the stats. Students in Headingley and Hyde Park account for about 65% of the population, 45% above the national average. The demographic result? A hollowed-out age structure where the average age is just 27. By 2026, this creates a huge spike in the IMD crime deprivation score, specifically for student-targeted households, and also a living environment deprivation score, as the seasonal nature of the population leads to sort of transient street scenes and the death of local services like primary schools, post offices, the businesses that need year-round visitation, but the students, they go home in the half term and then they come back. Not to mention the fact that there are, quite significant of antisocial behaviour. So that's Headingley. Next up, we've got Grimsby isn't just a story of the end of fishing. It's about international forces determining the trajectory of a place. During the Cod Wars, Iceland unilaterally expanded its exclusive economic zone to 200 nautical miles, shoving the Grimsby fleet out. Then came the EU Common Fisheries Policy in 1983, which introduced strict quotas that many local fishermen argue betrayed the industry. These industries led to a £198 million decrease in the value of UK landings. Today, Grimsby is a shell of its former self, with only about 20 trawlers left, from a fleet that once lined the docks for around a mile. This has left deep demographic scars. Unemployment in Grimsby sits at 5.8%, well above the 3.3% national average. And 1 in 3 workers is on less than living wage. The East Marsh remains trapped in the bottom 1% of the IMD, proving that when international laws change, local lives are the first to break. Next up is Blackpool is the ultimate bucket and spade destination. In the Victorian era, the railways turned this into the world's first mass-market tourist destination, a function it held for over a century. But in the 1970s, the global shift hit tourism. Cheap package holidays to Spain arrived, and suddenly the rainy northwest couldn't really compete. While the town saw record 19 million visitors in 2021, post-pandemic, the productivity of its workforce remains very low. GVA per worker is around 14,500, roughly half the national average. As visitor numbers crashed in the late 20th century, B&Bs were converted into low-quality flats, attracting a transient population of a lower socioeconomic group. This created a 2026 demographic crisis. Blackpool ranks first in England for both employment and health deprivation. On the IMD, it remains the most deprived local authority in the country, proving that a bounce back in visitor numbers doesn't always fix the problem. Next up is Ancoats in Manchester. Ancoats was once the heart of the world's first industrial suburb, packed with steam-powered cotton mills. As the industry moved to the global south, it became a bit of a wasteland. But in 2026, it's the story of gentrification. The function has flipped to tertiary and the creative industries, with average house prices in Manchester hitting $251,000 in early 2026, a 3.9% annual rise. Now, these demographics have therefore been completely replaced. Young professionals are moving in, taking up occupancy in the fancy warehouses that were turned into fancy apartments, while as of June 2025, 15,000 people still remain on the city's social housing list. So while the IMD scores for living environment have statistically improved, as luxury apartments replaced those factories, the deprivation hasn't really been solved. It's just been pushed out, if you like, or displaced, leaving Ancoats as an enclave where first-time buyers pay on average around £236,000 to buy a place to live. Okay, next up we move to successful and unsuccessful places, the geography of disparity, let's say. To understand success, you've got to understand what's called the positive multiplier effect. It starts with a trigger, maybe a new tech firm or government investment, and this brings high-skilled jobs. Those workers might have high disposable income, which they spend on local services, like cafes, gyms. This creates more tax revenue for the council from business rates to improve schools, transport, which then attracts even more investment. It's a virtuous cycle of growth that leads to further inward migration. As people chase that economic magnet, it becomes full of different pull factors. So in successful regions, you'll see tax revenues climb as much as 15% annually, fueling a self-sustaining loop of regional prosperity. So let's consider some of our winners in this cycle. First of all, we've got San Francisco. This was driven by the quaternary sector and the dot-com boom in the 1990s, and it became an economic powerhouse, where the average household income has soared past around $126,000 a year. Inward migration is off the charts. You're getting the best talent from around the globe looking to work for companies like Google, Meta, Apple, but it comes at a cost. By 2026, property prices are astronomical, with the average home in San Francisco sitting at around $1.4 million, and rents for a simple one-bedroom apartment around $3,000 a month. The infrastructure is also world-class, but the allure has created a massive skills shortage. Nearly 60% of service sector businesses report they cannot find enough staff because those workers simply can't afford to live there. In addition to this, it's led to huge income inequality, and that's because the cost of living in San Francisco is 25% higher than the rest of the country, and this just displaces those lower income families. Now let's flip to the UK. This is where we can look at the Itchen Valley in Winchester. This is the ultimate commuter village. Its success is built on accessibility and connectedness. So we're talking a rail connection with times to London Waterloo of under 58 minutes, allowing high-earning urban professionals to live the rural dream while still working in the global hub of London. And the wealth flows into that local area. So Winchester consistently boasts some of the best schools in the country, like Winchester College, with over 85% of students achieving grade 5 or above in English and maths, well above the average of 65%. But once again, there are those struggles in terms of service provision. Not everyone's going to be able to go to the private schools. So there will still be some state schools. And what these state schools really struggle with is finding subject specialists, because teachers just can't afford to live in these areas. So that means there then becomes an educational disparity. But what happens when you become unsuccessful? This is when you have to understand the spiral of decline. So it starts off with deindustrialization, which was driven by the global shift. This is where manufacturing moves to cheaper countries. Factories close, leading to mass unemployment. The best and the brightest then just leave. There's big out-migration. That's your brain drain. With less money in the town, local shops go bust. And then tax revenue can drop by around 30%, leaving councils unable to maintain the area. You have high levels of vacancy, high levels of dereliction. This attracts criminals, where the living environment decays, crime rates rise, and it becomes this negative feedback loop that's really hard to break without any regeneration efforts. Ultimately, people end up in negative equity, meaning that their property is worth less than they originally bought it for, trapping them in this area, which becomes a pocket of deprivation. Examples we've got: Detroit, which is in the Rust Belt of the US. Once the world's car-making capital, it was decimated by economic restructuring. The white flight, a massive population loss, where the city's residency plummeted from around 1.8 million to 50,000. The vacancy rate skyrocketed, with over 70,000 abandoned buildings and 31,000 empty lots littering the landscape. Educational attainment also plummeted as a consequence, so while the US average for degree-level qualifications is around 38%, in Detroit, only 16% of residents hold a bachelor's degree or equivalent. The most chilling stat? Crime. Detroit has faced violent crime rates of around 2,400 per 100,000 residents, which is 6 times the national average of 395 per 100,000 residents. So significant challenges in Detroit. But time for the reality check. Success is not always perfect. This is when we can talk about the paradox of success. In San Francisco and the Itchen Valley, we're seeing that crisis of success right now, specifically with income inequality. The top 5% of earners earn 15 times more than the bottom 20%. In Winchester's Itchen Valley, 1 in 4 teaching vacancies in physics and maths remains unfilled because teachers can't afford the average property price of £650,000. Detroit, things are looking up. We're seeing a green re-imaging with over 1,500 urban farms and community gardens popping up on formerly vacant land. And unemployment rates have dropped from a 2010 high of 25% to just 7.2% in 2026. So, unsuccessful places, it may just be a short-term thing that we're considering here. Over the long term, that degree of success could potentially increase, and then they could no longer be an unsuccessful place. Okay, next up, guys, we are looking at 4A.5, which is community engagement. Now, you don't just want to think about this as who votes. Engagement is like the heartbeat of a place. It's about who fights for things, but also who feels left behind. And so there are massive variations in how communities engage, usually boiling down to this idea of place attachment. So let's take Headingley and Leeds. With the student population sitting at 65%, place attachment is low because the residents are transient. In 2024 local elections, turnout in student-heavy wards like this often sits at around 20 to 25%. Why is that? Well, if you're only there for 3 years, you're less likely to care about local bin collections or library funding. Let's compare that to Winchester. Here you have an older demographic with a high median age and a longer length of residence. These people have the roots here. In affluent wards, in Winchester, local election turnout frequently hits 45 to 50%. The older, wealthier residents feel like they've got more skin in the game. So they want to protect house prices and schools. But remember, it's not just age. Ethnicity and deprivation also plays a role. Nationally, ethnic minority groups and those most deprived deciles often show lower turnout. So in some deprived wards, turnout can be as low as 15%. So why is this? Well, if successive governments haven't improved your living environment or your income or the schools in the area, why would you believe that your vote matters? Language barriers as well for first-generation migrants can also act as an intervening obstacle to formal engagement. But let's have a 2026 update, as we always do. The trend is now bucking in these left-behind areas. Groups once considered apathetic are turning to populist movements for answers. So in 2024, 2025, we saw a surge in engagement in post-industrial towns. Reform UK and nationalist movements have successfully mobilised voters who felt ignored by their more centrist parties. And some former Red Wall seats, turnout actually increased by around 5 to 10%, as disenfranchised groups felt they finally had a protest vote that mattered. And it proves engagement isn't dead, it just needs a catalyst. Now, engagement isn't just about politics, it's about the utilisation of services. Look at Cheetham Hill in Manchester, one of the most ethnically diverse wards in the UK. Here, the standard rules of deprivation and low turnout don't always apply. Why? Because engagement in places of worship and local community groups is incredibly high. There are over 40 different languages spoken here, and yet the community is tightly knit through religious and social hubs. Also, the active councillor effect is very strong here. In Cheetham Hill, local councillors are often active members of these religious communities or community groups. So the person-to-person connection drives turnout. So in recent elections, Cheetham Hill has seen turnout figures of nearly 35 to 40%, significantly outperforming other deprived wards. Finally, we've got to talk about conflict, another type of engagement. So sometimes people only engage when they want to stop something. Let's look at the first one. Save Barton Farm. This was in Winchester. This is the ultimate example of NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. An aging, affluent population engaged in a decade-long battle to stop 2,000 homes developing in a semi-rural area. They used their social capital, money, legal knowledge, and time to lobby the council. Despite over 1,000 formal objections, the project was pushed through by national planning authorities. They wanted to meet their house building targets in this area where there was a lack of affordable homes. Nevertheless, we are seeing high levels of engagement here because of that conflict. Main gripes were that there would be impacts on biodiversity, but also that there would be an incredible amount of strain on local services that weren't being provided in addition to this housing development. Second one is the Haygate estate. This was a different kind of conflict. A massive social housing estate was demolished to make way for Elephant Park, a mixed-use development. The estate originally had 1,200 social homes, and the development promised 25% affordable housing. But in reality, only 82 social rented homes remained on site. This triggered kind of more protest engagement. Local groups fought against this in what they called state-led or national government-led gentrification. So it highlights the divide between the elite and the wealthy, because there were many of the Latino and African communities that were displaced from this project. So, in summation, engagement is a bit of a double-edged sword. It can build a community like Cheetham Hill, or it can lead to bitter legal wars like in Winchester. So, always ask in your exam, who has the power to engage and who is being silenced? Okay, and that's it, guys. I do apologize. It's 10 o'clock at night. I've got to go to bed. I've got to prepare my own students in the morning. Hope that was useful to you. That was EQ1 and EQ2. All the best of luck for your paper 2. And don't forget to check out the link in my bio for paper 3. All the best.